Thank you for being here, and let's give it up for Todd. Round of applause, please, Todd Pryor.
Hello, hello. I'm going to talk tonight about the Queen Creek Restoration Project. It is not one project. It is going to be a series of projects, likely taking generations. The impacts that got us to this point are 150 years old now, so the path getting back this creek restored is likely going to be a long one. I'm going to talk to you a little about what those impacts were, why the creek it doesn't flow anymore, what the geological conditions are that made the creek so resilient in the past and why it was so water productive, and why it isn't producing now. We're also going to talk about the steps we're going to take to try to reverse that trend and try to get water flowing in the creek again. Part of the thing that you have to understand about what we're talking about with Queen Creek and what the wider picture in Queen Valley would be, the watershed for Queen Creek above the town of Superior is very small. It's 22 square miles roughly. When it passes by Superior, it widens way out. It becomes thousands of square miles. And then eventually it hits the larger Gila Basin and becomes huge. You know, it's part of the greater Gila watershed. So the work we're talking about now is primarily focused on the watershed between Oak Flat and the town of Superior and the impacts that have happened over the years, how we can restore that, how we can get water flowing more often in the creek, how we can keep the riparian area healthy. This isn't new work. This is something the town envisioned in about 98. The town commissioned a study, well before my time, to restore Queen Creek to its former glory. The mine had closed. There was no economic possible growth from that. They were looking at what assets they had, and they felt the riparian area, the creek, was their greatest asset, and they made a plan to restore it. A lot of the things in that plan aren't doable anymore. Laws have changed. It would be cost prohibitive. So what we did when I first came on is we took that study, pulled it off the shelf, pulled together, got a grant from the National Park Service and put a group together and tried to pull working items from that we could actually build ourselves. One of the first things that was on that list was restoring the bridges across the creek. That work was done 5 years ago. It was a little project that had a big impact. That's kind of what we looked for in that bigger document. I'm going to talk a little bit about the bigger projects we pulled from there, what we've done to try to further those, and what we look to do in the future. When I first pulled that study off the shelf, I started doing a lot of research. I started watching documentaries, looking on the internet. One of the videos that popped up that was really inspirational to me was this one. So I'll play it for you. It's fairly short, so I hope you'll be patient.
50 years ago, you couldn't hardly walk through this place. It was wall-to-wall brush. There wasn't any grass. There wasn't any water. Nobody wanted it. On the truck. On the truck. He's the finest dog in the United States of America. Yeah, in Texas, too. Well, I was born in Ohio, born into poverty, to be honest about it. Lived out in the country amongst the Amish people. So I really got my life example set for me by my own mother. That's where my love of the natural world came from. I've never inherited a nickel, but I inherited a love of the natural world and a respect for it. When I got out of the university, I took a job. I sold vacuum cleaners door to door. I went into the fast food business. I teamed up with a young man, Bill Church, and it was Church's Fried Chicken. And we built that company up to over 1,600 stores, and we sold it. And with that capital, I was able to come here and begin my work on Sela, Bamberger Ranch Preserve. My objective was to take the worst piece of land I could possibly find in the hill country of Texas and begin a process of restoration that would change it back to be one of the best, and that has happened right here. By habitat restoration, by working with Mother Nature instead of against her, and that's what we're all about. 46 years ago, not a drop of water. 7 water wells were drilled, 500 foot deep. Not a one produced any water. The top 125 foot of these hills looks like this. It's Edwards limestone. When the driller drilled all those wells for me, he said, Bamberger, there's one place up here on the top, my bit dropped 40 foot. He said, you got a cavern under there. It's like an auditorium. The only thing about it was, 46 years ago, it had no water in it. It was dry. It was dry because the water that was coming in was running off as opposed to sinking in. When I came here, all of the little holes and all of that limestone were just as dry as the one I'm holding in my hand. Now what happened? We replaced that condition with this condition 2.5 years after we began. The first spring came to life. As we continued on, another spring showed up. We got up to where we had 11. Where'd the water come from? It came out of all of that holes in that perched aquifer like that. That's where it come from. It was stored in the earth, and all because of one thing, just one. And I'm telling you, I'm going to show you the greatest conservation tool ever made, and everything I talk about could not have happened without grass. The hill country is just covered with woody species. Primarily, it's cedar. We took out a great portion of it here on the ranch. We were just covered with it. We had no grass. When we took out the cedar and spread native grass seeds and it began to grow, rainfall then percolated into the earth because of the root system of grass going down. Water percolates in, it fills up your aquifer until the aquifer is full, and when it's full, it has to come out somewhere, and they call that a spring. That spring supplied water for all the nature's critters, plus for all the families that live here, and it even sends water downstream to the city of Austin. Now, what does it cost? Our governments and governments all around the world, they're spending millions and millions of dollars doing all kinds of things, dams and reservoirs and pipelines, and all of this can be done by you and I. We don't have to have government. We can't expect government to do it all anyway. But if we do have some conservation ethics, the results are mind-boggling.
Now, do we see that kind of erosion here?
I'm telling you, truthfully, I've seen this property and the experiences that people have here change lives.
What does Sela mean?
Oh, beautiful. Thank you so much. What does Sela mean? When I was younger, I discovered in the Psalms the word Sela. It means to stop, to pause, to look around you and reflect on everything you see. To me, it's like Thoreau was to Walden Pond. Gives us a chance to say, what's my duty as a steward of this ranch land? And I believe it's to take care of it and to share it. And if you don't share what you have, you're going to live a lonely life. that is a necessary ingredient for every human being, that we need to catch up and live amongst Mother Nature and learn to appreciate her for what she really is. I've given this land to a foundation. It'll go on in perpetuity. It'll never be any different than you see it today. When I leave this world, that's what I want as part of my legacy.
So that is inspirational and it's aspirational, but it does have some sound science behind it. This is a Texas A&M study. It includes some of the San Pedro Basin, it includes the Texas Hill Country he's talking about, and it talks about the reduction of invasive and woody species, all the ladder fuels, the brush species in the ecosystem. And why are these things so prevalent now when they weren't in the past? A lot of those are impacts of colonialism. We brought in our cattle. The cattle eat the grass. The next year, the brush grows back. They don't eat the brush, they eat the grass. So the brush becomes more prevalent than the grasses do. Originally, Arizona, before settlement, was about 90% grassland. Now it's about 90% scrubland. So all of that, those impacts he was talking about, the fact that it drinks more water, it allows more erosion, it doesn't transition the water from the surface to the shallow aquifers. All those impacts are being felt by our watershed. What we need to do in order to do to solve that is to go in and do thinning. We remove the scrub species, the invasive tamarask, and remove the heavy mesquite bosque. And there are several projects in town where you've seen we've done that. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. But the bottom line is more than one bottom line. When you reduce these species, number one, shallow groundwater aquifers start to recover. The old growth trees become more healthy because there's more water available for them. You have more recreation access, you have a stronger canopy, so a stronger ecosystem and a better place for the bird species to stay. There's a lot of bottom lines. It's safer for fire because it doesn't have the ladder fuels. If you have a fire that grows through on the ground and a grass fire, it is very low risk. It's easy to put out, you can step over it. It's an easy to control fire. When they hit brush and the brush transitions that fire into the canopy catches on fire, it's very difficult to control. It goes much further, it causes much more damage, it burns much hotter. So by eliminating the ladder fuels, you create a fire safe zone as well. So we've got multiple bottom lines, multiple positives that come out of these projects, which means there's multiple grant sources we can go for to go after them. We have gone after fire protective grants, and we've gone for invasive species grants and been successful in both cases with the same project description because it does have these multiple bottom lines. Our primary goals are we want to help the riparian area recover. If you go through our riparian area, it was still listed out in the 98 study, you can see the cottonwood die-off. You can see the trees that are under stress and are losing their mass. By putting more water in there, we're going to help that riparian area recover. We're going to help our shallower aquifer recharge, which means there's going to be more water for the shallow groundwater wells that are along the creek, and those are going to stay wet more often. We're going to do restoration of the perennial base flow as much as possible. Queen Creek used to flow 10 months of the year maybe on good years and dry up completely a couple months. Now it flows a couple weeks of the year and dries up for the rest of it. That's a complete reversal of that trend. It's no longer a perennial creek, it's now an ephemeral creek. It only flows on occasion, only flows when it rains. But creating this nice restored riparian area is also a recreation asset. The Lost Trail was originally theorized in the 98 study, trying to take this nice riparian area and turn it into a recreation asset. We can already see that working. We've had the Aravipa runs, the donkey events, all these weekenders who come out for the recreation. So what are the impacts? How did we get here? Part of it is the underlying geology of Upper Queen Creek. Upper Queen Creek, you can see the white area is the town itself. That is mostly Gila conglomerate. It's got very low transmigration of water, very hard. The water stays on the surface when it reaches there. Up above town is also limestone. It's a different type of limestone. It's much more porous. It stored a lot more water. And it used to be the generator for that system that he was pointing out. You know, he was holding up that rock that looked like a sponge. It used to hold a bunch of water. But because the mine impacts over the last 100 years, it doesn't hold that water anymore. You essentially take in that sponge and you put a straw at the base of it and you start sucking all the water out. So it doesn't recharge, it doesn't hold that water, it doesn't release it over time, so the creek doesn't flow as much as it used to. Now this is what I was talking about. The caliche below town is very hard. Anybody who's dug in their backyard, you go about a foot and you hit the caliche, it's almost concrete. It is about 4,000 feet deep. It's beneath the entire town. The plate that is the town itself is sinking, and the plate that is above us was rising. So it's much more porous, much more affected, much more eroded above town. So the interactions between surface and groundwater above town are much higher than they are in the town itself. So that's one of the important aspects of our future restoration projects. Because once we get water to the town, it will stay relatively close to the surface groundwater and will have fairly quick restoration effect. It will have limited use for deeper groundwater recharge because that is such a thick, such a hard base, water doesn't penetrate, there's no transmigration of that water. So if you put a recharge project on the surface, it will only recharge the shallow groundwater aquifer, not the deeper aquifer. So originally the creek was perennial. The first impacts where that started to change were about 1900 to 1920. The mining impacts of Queen Creek itself started when they moved from the old town of Pinal to Superior itself, to the Lake and Superior workings at the town of Queen directly above town. So the historic mine impacts were, there's in different lifts, and I'm going to show you all the different mining operations. It's an extensive history over the last 140 years. One of the things that was done for mining in about the 1870s, 1890s, is they cut every tree in the entire basin. The original Pinal plant was an electrical generator, but they used steam generators to produce that electricity. So they cut all the trees in the entire region. So most of the tree growth we see here is less than that 140 years old. Boyce Thompson came into town. If you look at the original pictures of the Boyce Thompson Arboretum, they're almost bare of trees because all of them were cut down. The Boomtown died about 1890. Magma copper begins about the Queen workings were about 1900. The magma copper is about 1910. 1923, Boyce Thompson buys it, and mining operations go much higher. In 1971, it all starts to close down. The smelter closes. 82, the mine closes. Again, BHP bought it, reopened it for a short period, and then closed it again. They didn't close it because it wasn't viable. They closed it because BHP was having financial problems at the time. They made some poor decisions. Now we're back in BHP and Rio Tinto have formed a joint venture. They're talking about reopening it. The land exchange legislation was passed in 2015, and now we're in the environmental impact statement. The environmental impact statement has relevance because some of the data that came out that showed us what the impacts were in the EIS. Again, most of the trees were cut. You can see the Lake Superior in Arizona operation. It was right above town on where the Lost Trail is now, where US 60 went through. You can see some of the old shafts across the tunnel. Why that's relevant is because all of those workings were fairly shallow. They were right next to the creek, and they created a huge fracture zone under the creek. That fracture zone is tied to all the current workings as well. So the dewatering is dewatering all of those systems, not just the ones up at the top of the hill, because they're all interlinked from 100 years away. You can see that this is, going up Queen Creek, there used to be 3 springs that had dams hooked up to them. Those dams provided a significant portion of the town's drinking water. Not all of it, some of it came from the Belmont mine. You can see in a picture from 1885, it was full of water. You can see the picture today, there's not a drop of water to be seen. And here's all the mine workings that underpin all that. You can see the pumping shafts that are spread through the entire system, that are dewatering that system. That water is pumped out and goes to the treatment plant up on the hill. And so it's removing all the water from underneath that system. There's great interlink between what's happening on the surface and what's happening underneath the ground, and we're going to cover that later. Here is a picture of the same workings from above. One of the things I'll point out from the last picture is if you look at the Never Sweat tunnel at the top of the picture, it's very close to the surface. What a lot of people tell me is that in the 50s, 60s, the creek was still running more often. As soon as the Never Sweat was put in, it was a significant decrease. And the 98 study lists that decrease. It says that about 150 gallons a minute was flowing into the Never Sweat. So what they did is they went above on the surface and they lined it for 300 feet on the surface. Then they went underground and they lined it for 300 feet under the ground, and it didn't even slow it down. It's so fractured around there, it just flows all around those and goes back into the workings, and then it's pumped back out. So when the environmental impact statement came out, it raised a lot of questions for us. So we immediately began negotiations with Resolution to address the water impacts. It took about a year, but we finally came up with solutions for most of these problems, and there are standing agreements to address just about every impact I've mentioned to you. Here's what the slide that alarmed everybody in the EIS. This is taken directly from the EIS. It says that our creek will decrease by 18% in surface flow based on the subsidence crater. Again, that's not going to happen overnight. It takes 10 years before the subsidence even starts, and then it will take a significant period of time for the full impacts to be felt on for the subsidence crater. But you have to remember that drainage is drained through that area, so there will be a decrease in water. So this is the estimated stream loss to the creek. This was done through study of seeing how, when it rained, how much water showed up at the pumps. Doing a full study of a hydrological model to determine how much they thought would go in underground. The average of the models is 471 acre-feet per year. Just goes into the workings and is sent to the treatment plant on the hill. Resolution has agreed to restore that amount of water to us. So they're going to give back 471 acre-feet. The question of where that water would come from is not yet determined. It's very unlikely it's going to come from the treatment plant. There are reasons for that. Number one, the water balance says they're going to reuse all that water on site. So they're not going to be releasing that water to us. Number two, Queen Creek is an impaired waterway. So anything that is done in that creek has to have a full discharge permit and a tip study. The tip study is, they're studying the total, or the TMDL study, sorry. It's the total maximum daily load. It's the amount of copper primarily that's flowing down the creek. A study was started about 4 or 5 years ago was very flawed. It didn't address how much was naturally occurring and how much was smelter deposition. They're doing a new study right now. It will probably take 2 or 3 years. There's public engagement on it. That is going to try to analyze how much naturally occurring copper is there, how much is due to later mine impacts, how much is due to smelter impacts, and what is, and that will be used to inform all future permits. So the town has a discharge permit for our wastewater treatment plant. Resolution would have to get a discharge permit for Queen Creek. It is in court challenge. It's unlikely it's ever going to be released. It's unlikely that one is a source of water for us to be able to use for our restoration projects. So we're going to have to look for other sources. A question came up last time about the quality of the water. So I've got, if you want to pass that around, I've got a little form. The treatment process was designed in collaboration with the U of A, and they released right after the pumping started, they released a statement telling you what the water quality was, where it's going, what it's being used for. That is that's still in effect. That's still where it's going. It's the same use. Again, it goes to the New Magma Irrigation District. It's being put in there to irrigate crops. Resolution isn't getting credit for it because it is a groundwater. You can't get a storage credit for something that's a groundwater dewatering. So it's just going and being put on crops, the New Magma Irrigation District, and decreasing pumping. For those who don't know, we are in the Phoenix AMA, the Phoenix Advanced Management Area. All groundwater and surface water is calculated and permitted, so there's a total maximum amount everybody's allowed to use. If you want to use more, you have to buy it. So the town, for instance, would have to, if we wanted to develop land in town, we would have to go buy water on the open market from a surface water source and somehow get into town to be able to do development. That's true of just about any user. 72% of the water in the Phoenix AMA is used for irrigating crops. And of that, the number one crop is alfalfa. So all industrial users put together is about 6%. It's housing, it's irrigation of crops is number one. And again, alfalfa, cotton, all these sort of things, where real efficiencies and real reuse would have great impacts. So the water mitigations that we worked out is we're going to return, take any fresh mine water inflow that has not reached the workings, that is not contaminated in any way, it's just a surface water, restore that to the creek if possible. The original plan from the '98 study was the never sweat water. The never sweat water used to be used as drinking water for the mine. It's very clean, it doesn't go down into the workings. The theory was they would take some of that water and restore it to the creek. And that's again in the '98 study, it's not new thought. But the mine has gone in and relined all of those tunnels. They didn't reline one section, they did all of them. So the inflow is much lower in the never sweat. So that may or may not be a source. But we are going to continue to work with them to do water mitigations. And again, reducing invasive species, reducing pressing species is very helpful. So as part of the 404 mitigation for their tailings pond, they're going to put in a conservation easement for about 35 acres from the US 60 bridge down to the wastewater treatment plant discharge. And that's going to be a conservation easement. They're going to go in and do restoration projects. They're going to restore stream flow. They're going to reduce invasive species. There's a written plan for that. They're going to do enhanced monitoring of the stream, which they're already doing. They've added new sensors for the stream at our request so that they know what the flows are. They're also monitoring the groundwater wells in town. So if you know anyone who has a ground well, and they want to be monitored so that if there's a drop in level, they can get a mitigation. Put them in contact with Resolution. They will monitor that well, and they will address any impacts that go to it. And again, they're going to restore water from the subsidence impacts. We have that 471 acre feet that they have to restore. There's an additional impact. The Queen Creek flows somewhere between 1,300 and 1,800 acre feet a year. If that reduces by 18%, then that's going to be a, what, 200 or 300 acre feet they're going to have to restore in addition to the 471. Again, the source of that water is to be determined. Right now, they're purchasing water credits for us on the open market. Again, Phoenix AMA, there's a set amount of water. If you want water, you have to buy it from somebody. You can't just start grabbing it. So that is the first step until we can work out a method to actually get some water but restored to the creek. And that is in progress. Again, here's the Superior Waters and Trails Action Plan. About a third of these items we've actually done. And this is available on the town's website. If you go on your phone and you download the town notification app, you go to Plans and Studies, the Waters and Trails Action Plan is on that list. So you can access it on your phone, read it to your heart's delight. It included things like finishing the Lost Trail, adding another 2 miles of Lost Trail, which we did. It included restoring the bridges, the pedestrian bridges across the creek. It talked about reducing invasive species. We've done several of those projects. We've done several fuels reduction projects in town. We've cleared a grand total of about 20 acres in the creek and about 55 acres total. We did the fire break around town. It's not in the riparian area, but it's still in a watershed, so these fuels reduction projects should still see the benefit. We got an Army Corps restoration grant for the pipelines. Now, the 98 study had one pipeline in it that came from the wastewater treatment plant. It came up to the center of town, to the White Hills area, and it put a 2 million gallon pond there and put water into the ground, then put a well next to it, pumped that water into the pond. That was started in 2001. I'm told 9/11 happened. I wasn't there. There was some dysfunction at the time. It was partially put in and not finished. So it extends from the wastewater treatment plant to the highway, and that's it. So we put in a grant to put the rest of that pipeline up to the US 60 park to do the restoration project that was originally envisioned in the 98 study, which was to take, to replant a stand of native cottonwood wash and to restore, to get rid of the invasive species and do a restoration project. We added another project. I told you about those fracture zones previously. Let's see if we can get back to that. Okay, so you got the fracture zones. You see the purple ones at the bottom? That's the oldest workings and the shallowest workings. That is the fracture zone between about a quarter mile from above town all the way to about the water tank. And it's underpinned with mine workings under there. Again, very shallow. If you actually stand on the Lost Trail, you can see one of the shafts directly across the creek. So the water goes, there's actually a hole, one of those pictures there. That's a hole in the creek. If you go and look in the creek down just below the bridge, the 1922 US 60 bridge, you'll see that hole in the creek. That picture is the creek flowing about 4 feet wide, hitting that hole and then disappearing. So the entire intent of the upper pipeline is there's an old infiltration gallery in the creek near that water tank. It used to provide drinking water to the town. It still worked until the 90s, but the turbidity went too high. I mean, too much sand in it. So they abandoned that. So that's still sitting there. That infiltration gallery is still sitting there. So this pipeline will take the water that's in that infiltration gallery, pipe it past the fracture zone, and then drop it back on the hard rock right at the Magna Bridge. That will restore a base flow of about 100 acre feet between those two projects. It's not the end goal, but it's very sustainable. It doesn't depend on the mine to do anything for us. It's all local water. Whether the mine gets permitted ever or not, whether those mitigations ever happen or not, this project can move forward. We did do the first test restoration over the last year. We did 2 of them. We flowed water for 15 days the first time and 30 days the second. Between those two was about 100 acre feet each. 100 acre feet the second time. The first time was about 50 acre feet. The entire intent of that was to test how the creek responded to the restored flow. It's a changed ecosystem from what it was naturally. It doesn't have the same species that would be in there to manage the bug population. It doesn't have the same plant species that it would have had natively. So we're going to have to restore an ecosystem without a good baseline. So we want to see how it responds to the restored water. How long does it stay on the surface when water turns off? What's it like during the dry season? What's it like during the wet season? And that study was just completed. The final report isn't out yet, but we continue to work through that to make sure that the project is appropriate for the ecosystem. One of the things that has come out of this is we will probably have to cycle the system. So we'll run it and then shut it off, because a natural ecosystem shut off for several months a year. So we need to turn the system off and let the water dry out, let the system recover, and then restore water again a few months after. We've also been doing repair and air restoration. Like I said, we've restored quite a few acres. The first one was kind of a proof of concept. We got an AmeriCorps crew. We got a very small grant from DFFM for forestry, and we cleared 2 acres and put 2 miles of trail into the creek. And that was using an AmeriCorps crew. That was very effective. It worked really well. So we did another 7.5 acres on a piece of land we got donated from Dr. Will. Took us 2 years to get the donation done, but when we did finally get it, we got another AmeriCorps crew. We didn't get a grant at all for that other than the AmeriCorps crew. We went in and did our own restoration on that. For those who want to look at that, if you go down Old Phoenix Road, you'll see that 7.5 acre lot that we got from Dr. Will. What did we do? We went in and we thinned the trees. We cut about half of the trees out. We gave them proper spacing between each other so they can grow. One of the things you need that everyone knows about mesquites is there are 3 of them growing right together, they're never going to get big. If you want them to get big, you have to give them the space to grow. So you give them a 8 to 10 foot separation, you let the canopy spread out, and they grow taller, bigger. The first project we did that with was the US 60 Park, the Caboose Park. We went in and cut 2/3 of those trees out. We had the arborist come from the arboretum and he marked which trees we should cut, and we reduced those trees. If you go in there today, you'd be hard pressed to find where we cut them. The canopy's completely filled on all those gaps. The trees are twice as tall as they were, and it's a much healthier little forest section. So we're doing a lot of that similar work through the entire creek. We're reducing invasive species. Like there's oleanders everywhere. There's trees of heaven everywhere. There's some salt cedar, not as much as other places. One of the worst things that we've got in there is bunch grass. We've got bunch grass all over town, fountain grass. It'll be very difficult to get rid of. That will probably be a future phase. Bunch grass it's invasive. It muscles out the other plant species. It burns like a Roman candle. It's not a positive species for the ecosystem. So we want native grasses. Here's an example of the type of project I'm talking about. This is Old Phoenix Road, right after we finished it. You can see 2/3 of the trees and scrub were cut out of there, and they were given space to grow. The ladder fuels were removed. We didn't even worry about the grasses. We didn't cut any of the little weeds. It's all about the ladder fuels and the brushy species. Again, we extended the trail through, and you can see that picture looks very similar to the other project. These are all multiple bottom line projects. You build a trail, you cut the underbrush. You're doing all of the positives that we talked about from the start. You do a restoration project, you open it up, it becomes much more positive for recreation. Again, multiple bottom lines. There's the invasive species that were kind of targeted by the grants we went after. And oleanders are very popular in town. They are toxic. If you touch them with your bare hand, they can cause cardiac arrhythmias. If you burn them, they can cause arrhythmias. They can kill you. So you can't burn them in our destructor. We have to actually take them and put them in dumpsters, and they have to go to landfills because they're unsafe to burn. Tamarask is salt cedar. There are a lot of different breeds of salt cedar. The brushy, scrubby salt cedars are really a problem. You'll see some of the older salt cedars, especially on the north end of town, big old monster trees, right? That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the small invasive salt cedars down in the creek. And again, fountain grass. They are very difficult to get rid of. It takes multiple year retreats. People have talked about taking up to 5 years to get rid of fountain grass. You have to keep going back and retreating. Finding a grant source that will let you retreat for 5 years in a row is a challenge. Usually a grant wants to give you, here's your check, go spend it, and have it all done by the end of the year. If you tell them I want this to go for 5 years, they say, fund it yourself. Our plans for the future. We want to restore the flow by creating those pipelines. Again, that's a $3 million project. About 2.25 is coming from the Army Corps. Resolution is making a match for about $750,000 for that. Greg Stanton is the congressman who put that forward. He included this in his project. It's a congressionally directed spending project. We're going to be doing invasive species reduction, and we're going to continue these projects. There's another project we just got funded through Wild AZ. They're the nonprofit that does fuels reduction projects around the state. We helped them write the grant. We'll be supporting them with our equipment instructor. They're going from the base of the Castleberry all the way halfway on to the Arboretum, and they're doing invasive fuel reduction and creek restoration. So that project will be starting this winter, hopefully, depending on how long it takes them to get it all organized. We've applied for a watershed management plan. That's a $300,000 grant that Garland has written for us through U of A. That project would build a community-based organization that would meet, discuss our watershed, come up with plans, select from all the available sources what the best projects were, and then as a group try to get those projects funded. For instance, say we want to do a wetland in the White Hills for managed aquifer recharge. That's probably a 5 to 10 year permitting process. It requires engineering and design, and we have to make sure that's the actual appropriate thing to do. That has to be studied. You have to have that study to present to the funders saying, yes, we looked at this. This is a good thing to do. This is a good plan. Or we, as a part of this study, say, well, no, that wetland isn't going to work. There's too much hard rock underneath. It wouldn't store enough water. It's a waste of money. So those are the sort of questions that this watershed management group is going to have to meet and discuss and come up with the next generation of projects. Right now, we're working on the best thinking of 1998, and we're trying to take those projects and actually build them based on what resources we can scrape together. The next phase is coming up with an actual plan that we can take to funders and get funded to really move this project forward. So we're going to continue to work to build public-private partnerships. It always helps your grant application if you've got a private funder who's willing to help fund your match. Some of these projects will have a 90% grant, 10% match. Some of these projects will have 50%. Some of them are all loan. So you need the public-private partnership to help fund your match, or you're never going to get there. We're going to continue to follow the basic brush management plan that actually has the biggest benefit, right? So it's a simple thing to do, decrease brush. It has huge bottom lines in multiple sectors. All right, that's all my yammering. Questions?
I'm wondering where is that pipeline that was created but wasn't finished? Can you explain where that is?
It goes from the effluent discharge of the wastewater treatment plant. Henry built it, so he should be able to tell you right where it is. And it goes to the Superior Wastewater Treatment Plant sign. It's actually sitting on the surface there. You can see it right next to the sign. It took us a little while to find it. Nobody knew where it was. So we finally talked to the right person and we pointed at it. That pipeline, probably that little section of pipeline would cost today more than the entire project would have cost in 1998. Sadly, prices have skyrocketed. This pipeline, I don't know what the grant was in 2000, but it wasn't $3 million.
When we laid that pipe, Todd, that was done with slave labor. Me, Roy Chavez, and Angel Gomez ran the backhoe, and we dug it all the way from the sewer plant all the way up to the fence up by the highway, by the airport.
Most of the pipe for that pipeline is still sitting on the ground. The tools, the welder that we used to weld it together, disappeared a decade or two ago.
We rented that machine.
Ah.
That's what we did. We rented it. That's why it wasn't there.
Yeah.
I had welded pipe before in the mine, so I told Chris at that time, Zapata, rent me a welder and I'll do the welding, Angel will do the digging, and me and Roy would lay the pipe in the ground.
Yeah.
That's why it's not there.
We're up to the point now where we can actually start, the Army Corps has taken 2 years to approve the project plan and the contract on that grant. So we're getting close to actually being able to start the EA on it. It's going to need a full environmental assessment because it needs a permit from ADOT to run up the ADOT right away. So now because the highway's expanded, we have to bore under the highway. It's going to cost, just boring under is probably $500,000 for that big a pipeline. It's a very expensive project. It would have been done back then, probably could have been done a lot more affordably. Unfortunately, they won't let you do things like hang a pipe on the bridge anymore. The original plan was to hang the pipe to go under the US 60 bridge. ADOT's rules say, no, you can't do that anymore. So we have to bore under the highway. All very pricey, and unfortunately you have to put this 6-inch pipe in there, you have to bore out a 12-inch sleeve, because everything has to be sleeved under the highway. So this cost have skyrocketed. The grant's going to pay those costs. It's just, it takes years of my life to do the paperwork. I'd love to get some of that time back that I spent talking to people about a grant. But we're getting close. Hopefully we'll get that all funded soon. And I am too long. Somebody else got questions? Questions?
Where does Resolution Copper figure they're gonna get this 700 acre-feet of water?
That is to be decided, and I don't know. One of the things they're doing right now, again, is they're buying it on the open market and they're giving us the credits for it until that can be determined. As far as where the water's gonna come from, they haven't told us that yet. So we're still discussing that. That plan is being written. When I know that, I'll be sure to share that. Like I said, I share everything. So
And
feel free to.
will the water quality be tested before it goes into this system?
Any water that has to reach the creek has to have an EDQ discharge permit. It will have to be, a NIPDIS permit has to be monitored and tested on a regular basis. We have 3 discharge permits for the town of Superior for our wastewater treatment plant. We have to submit a sheet that long of different testing samples every month to show the water quality of that. And if we exceed, ADHU sends us a notice of violation and a correction order. So those limits have to be set under the permit. They do not currently have a discharge permit for any mine water. And again, their plan is to reuse it on site. They've built an RO plant, a reverse osmosis plant, to take that water, and they're going to filter through the water that comes out of the plant, and you're going to use a lot of it on site. So if you look at the balance for the EIS, it doesn't show any of that water ever leaving site. It's all going to be used by them. Right now, it's going to the Magma Irrigation District because they don't have anything to use it for. There's no production.
Todd, you mentioned the annual flow between 1,200 and 1,800.
Yeah.
What's the time frame on that? What year was that?
So 1,300 is roughly our drought years. 1,800 is roughly the 1996 high flow rate. Our late 90s we had a huge wet season. So that was about 1,800 acre feet. Now with the drought, it's about 1,300 acre feet.
Who studied that?
That was done through a hydrological study. A contractor came in and ran it through all the models. There's about 6 different models they ran it through. What you have to remember about water is water that falls on the surface is not the same thing as water that ends up in the creek. Only about 10% of the water that falls on the surface of the land actually makes it to the creek. So any calculation of what has to take that into effect. So there's all these really complex computer models that look at that area and determine how much water falls on the surface, how much sinks in, how much evaporates, how much actually goes to the creek. And again, it's about 10% of what actually falls on the surface.
Another thing, when the FEIS came out in 2021, we had a meeting at the Oak Flats when Bernie Guyan came down from the U.S. Forest Service. He was in charge of the area. And Chairman Randler asked Bernie if he could initiate another water study pertaining to the impacts that the mine was going to be doing to the area. So Bernie Guyan said, well, we'll see what we could do. And lo and behold, he did. He assembled the National Hydrology team from the Bureau of Land Management, and one of the hydrologists was from Arizona. And as a result of that report, it showed that the FEIS, the BLM report showed that the situation was going to be a lot worse than what the FEIS stated. And I don't know if you incorporated those figures in your study or not, but one of them was that the aquifers, the shallow and the deep ground, were totally going to be destroyed and irreversible damage was going to occur. And that's in volume 2 of the FEIS.
Yeah, I've read the BLM response. Part of the problem with the BLM response is they were pretty clear that they did not have enough time to read the entire report. They did not have, and they felt they needed more time to study it. As far as the hydrology, and I'm not a hydrologist.
I'm not either. I'm just going by what they said.
A lot of the items that they discussed in the BLM response had nothing to do with any of the issues I'm talking about.
No, I'm just saying that the potential to affect the water coming down the creek eventually, drying up, what have you, affecting the streams and what have you.
And again, because the plans are based on monitoring and mitigation.
Sure.
If there are higher, that's kind of, our approach has been, the federal government, the special interest groups, the mine, they all fight about a lot of stuff.
Sure.
Right? And the town has to stay whole no matter who wins.
Sure. And that was our goal when I was on the council. The mine had abandoned the town, shut it down, and our vision was to increase the tourism. And we're well aware that tourism and recreation generates $24 billion a year, 3 times as much as the mines does. So our goal was to turn Superior into a recreation, camping, hiking, mountain climbing haven. So where we could lure these tourists to come in, spend their money at our restaurants, stay at our hotels. We were going to establish the trail from the Arboretum, come up through the Picket Post House, up the canyon, up the creek, and all the way up to the tank.
And I'll be clear, number one, I'll thank the community leaders at the time for that vision.
Yeah.
Number 2, again, we went to that study that had been sitting on rust and molding on a shelf for decades, and we pulled all stuff out. As a result, our restaurant and bar sector in town has increased to 265% in the last 2 years. We've got trails, so we're marketing those trails. We've hired a marketing company. We're bringing recreation to town. We're bringing events to a town. It's working.
Sure.
That is very effective. Our number 1 revenue stream in town is sales tax now. It used to be 3rd or 4th. We were completely dependent on state share. So it's been a massive swing in the economy of the town to around ecotourism. And again, whoever wins the EIS, whoever wins that fight, the town needs to be able to move that agenda forward.
Yep.
So we're fighting for the mitigations. If they win, we get the mitigations to make sure that stays whole. And if they don't, we have sustainable projects that advance our agenda anyway.
And that was always my thought, whether the mine goes or not, as long as the town's focused on moving forward, that's what should be our main goal, is the best of the community. Whether it goes or not, that should be our main focus. Because if it does go, the train's already moving forward, you know what I mean?
Yeah, and for instance, the water restoration, the first phase, this pipeline, this $3 million project, it's not a mine project. We're not dependent on mine water. This is the old infiltration gallery owned by Arizona Water. They've signed an agreement with us to access their water under their surface right, so that if, again, resolution holds up and goes away, that project is sustainable for the long term. And the wastewater treatment plant. One of the things we have to be aware of with our wastewater treatment plant and the amount of water we pull from the wastewater treatment plant is that water we put in that creek goes and fills all the wells at the Arboretum. So there's a very limited amount we can pull. And we produce maybe 140,000 or 140 acre feet a year out of that. We can only pull 30 or 40 out before we begin to affect stream flows. So by restoring the water up higher in Queen Creek from that infiltration gallery, we do a net positive to the creek and we don't affect negatively the Boyce Thompson Arboretum.
What's the sanitary plant putting out nowadays? Gallons?
It's been going up recently. Our population has been going up despite what the census says. It was in the range of about 140,000. About a decade ago it was 140 acre feet. A decade ago it was about 170 acre feet. Now it's coming in the high seasons. It's coming close to those same levels we were seeing a decade ago. So the plant is producing more water. As we develop, as we get more housing, more water will come from because our water comes from the valley. It comes from a desert well system out by Florence Junction. It's pumped 26 miles to town. When there are more houses in the town, more of that water goes to the wastewater treatment plant, and it's a net gain for the town's ecosystem itself, especially if we can positively reuse that water and not just put it back in the creek to flow back down to Queen Valley. No offense. All right. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So what's the name of the aquifer that Superior's in?
The name of the aquifer Superior's in? The aquifers are based on lumps of water. There's 4 or 5 perched aquifers above town, the largest being the Apache Leak Tuft. The Apache Leak Tuft extends, it's many thousand feet deep. It extends under the town itself, but below that cap of caliche. So deep wells that go all the way through the caliche into the deeper water, they actually hit the Apache Leak Tuft. The more shallow ones, most of the wells in town don't get even close to that. So they're pulling from the Gila conglomerate, which is the technical name for the caliche that we all live and stand on.
And so would you say that the Apache Leak Tuft is like the largest as far as surface area that covers the town of Superior?
It's above town. It's not, and below to a certain extent, but it's at an angle. But it goes all the way to, I believe, almost to the top of the world. It's a fairly large underground aquifer. It doesn't really conform to surface water features, so it's hard to visualize. But there are maps of it in the EIS.
Okay. And there's not one then that you say like where we're standing underneath us is the blank aquifer.
We are, because, okay, so you've got deep water aquifers, you've got groundwater, shallow aquifers, you've got surface water. The interactions between those are much higher in some areas and very low in others. In our area, the interactions between the deep groundwater system and the shallow water system is very limited because of this hard caliche block underneath us. Above town, much more transmigration between those two systems. So that's why when water flows across the surface, we're talking, what is that, 30% of it flows underground? Or not quite, about 20% goes underground. And that interaction is why the system up there is more porous, again, a better sponge than the town itself. That's one of our challenges with the restoration, is the town itself is not a very good restoration target, at least in a large system approach, because it's so hard, there's so little groundwater storage here that any recharge project is going to have very limited impact. But we can do other projects in other areas to recharge our groundwater. For instance, if we were to do a managed recharge at the desert well field and bring water from other sources and recharge it there, then that would make sure our groundwater wells, which is what supplies all the drinking water for the town, stay solid and whole down there. So maybe the watershed management plan doesn't have a local recharge. Maybe it has a recharge in our area of impact and our well system, so that we have a nice solid water supply. That's to be determined. It's a public process. It is, we're gonna have experts in the room. We're gonna get there. But the first step is to start talking about it. Any more questions?
Just one last note, Todd. We had a meeting with the governor the other day up at the casino in San Carlos, and one of the things we did initiate and ask her to do was to complete a water study for the East Valley, considering that it's growing at such a fast rate. There's concerns, of course, with superstition business. We're looking at 1.2 million people possibly living there. There was another study done on the west side of Phoenix where the Haraquala aquifer was done when Governor Ducey was in office. He hid that report, and it came out when Governor Hobbs took office, and it was never made public, but she made it public. And as a result of that report, it showed that there wasn't enough water for all this massive development that was taking place in Buckeye. It was growing so fast. So on that pretext, we asked her if she could conduct a study on the east side of the valley, because it is exploding and it's growing. Everybody's buying CAP water with whatever they can get their hands on. But she said she's going to look into it. One of her main concerns is water, because we have a lot of companies that are building their factories using lots of amounts of water. So, you know, we'll see, and hopefully that study can come out and show that, you know what, we can better manage our water so that we can expand and do more things like we're talking about.
And I would agree that that's necessary, and we will be raising the same issue with the governor. And
sure.
Here's why. We are lumped into the Phoenix AMA, which means we are in, according to the management, the same area as Buckeye. So their overdevelopment, their overuse of groundwater means that we can't access our much more healthy groundwater system over here.
Oh yeah.
So, and the question about Superstition Vistas, yes, the Phoenix AMA has some banking in there for that future development, but they have not purchased any groundwater right. There is no water associated with the Superstition Vistas project. The only part of Superstition Vistas that's been able to be built is the 4,000 acres near Apache Junction, and near Apache Junction supplied that water right. Who is going to go out and build the infrastructure, acquire the surface water right in order to be able to build Superstition Vistas? It is a theoretical, which is guiding the conversation, but without any real practical view on it. And another issue with the Phoenix AMA and the governor's order on groundwater is that it doesn't consider the fact that rural communities are affected by it. We're being lumped in with Queen Creek, with Gilbert, with Buckeye, all of which are growing at huge rates. We can't even do right-sized development to make sure that we can have adequate housing stock and affordable housing stock for our people, because we can't do any development. And that is the problem with the approach to the AMA now, saying you cannot do any development based on groundwater, which is silly because it doesn't consider the health of that groundwater system. Our groundwater system has not decreased in level the entire time they've had that thing. It was put in the 40s. The water is the same level now it was back then. Why? It's apparently a very healthy recharged aquifer, and there isn't a lot of drain on it. So should they be, the question here about, for instance, Phoenix AMA, look at water use, 72% of it is used for agriculture. Of that, top two crops, alfalfa and cotton. So fast fashion and alfalfa for export are using most of the water in our area. Industrial users, 6%. Houses, somewhere around 28 or something like that percent of the use. That is it's a huge drain on the system. But the fact that we are transitioning away from agriculture and towards residential housing means that the per acre use is going down. So if you take a bunch of acreage for alfalfa, you sell that to a land developer, you put a bunch of houses there, 1 acre per lot in McMansions, the water use for that acreage goes down. So the question here is, are we looking at the actual active water balance? Are we basing it on historical agriculture numbers? And the Phoenix AMA model is going to be challenged. I'm sure there are already working groups talking about the fact that the model is, for instance, it says that the New Magma Irrigation District will use 30,000 acre-feet a year. It hasn't used that for decades. It uses about 10,000 acre-feet a year. But that 30,000 acre-feet is still in the model. How much, a house takes 0.27 acre-feet per house per year. So how many houses are we losing with that 20,000 acre-foot of banking? I'm not saying that there shouldn't be proper management. I'm saying one size fits all for the entire Phoenix AMA isn't working, and it doesn't work for us.
Well, basically, if you look at AMA, it was developed in the 80s and it's outdated. And that's where we're coming from. We're saying, hey, you know what, we're gonna lay new ground rules, you know, because we have foreign companies coming in and taking advantage of our weak water laws, and they're doing unregulated pumping, you know, which is depleting the aquifers too. So it has to be managed right. New rules have been need to be written because they're outdated. They're old. You know, 45 years old. You know.
Yeah, and I think a lot of these issues we get tied up in hyperbole as well. You look at like you look at the water use for the mines. They are less than 1% of the Phoenix AMA water use for all the mines put together. So you look at agriculture, by far the greatest user, getting unrestricted groundwater pumping for decades. We had in the 90s the water table in the lower basin down there had sunk by like 300-400 feet because of unrestricted groundwater pumping for agriculture. The CAP canal came online, and they started using CAP water to replace that agriculture water, and the water table came back up. That means that we're entirely dependent now on Colorado River water. And they took that beautiful resource and they sold 110% of it. And until they decrease the entire model for everyone, they're going to continue to oversell that. And on all the reservoirs above the Colorado River are going to continue to sink to the point where they become no longer storage. So we have to address bigger picture stuff, and they're not. Whenever we start talking about the Colorado River, 1,000 attorneys run into the room, and whatever comes out the bottom end makes no sense. The models have to be logical, and right now they're not.
Yeah, that's true. It's not balanced.
Questions? That was a lot of information for one little speech.
It was good.
Todd, you've worked tirelessly for our town. You're doing stuff in the evenings all the time for this meeting and that meeting, and you keep a level head, and I appreciate the fact that you love our town, you live the life of service, and that you do it in a way that is as fair and as just as you possibly can. So thank you for that. Thank you for coming here. Appreciate it very much. And let's all give it up for Todd.